All the gurus have been lying to you. Did you know that when you wholesale houses, sometimes you do actually need the money to buy these properties? Knowing this strategy can literally save you tens of thousands of dollars. And in this video, I'm gonna break down the reasons why you may need to use this strategy. And if you're new to my channel, my name's Austin Rutherford, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, live in South Florida now, flipped hundreds of houses, own an almost 100 unit portfolio. And if you wanna learn more about real estate, go to my website, theaustinrutherford.com. So what am I even talking about? There's two strategies here. One is called wholesaling, the other is called double closing. And we all generally know the idea of wholesaling. So wholesaling is when you talk to a seller and you get that seller to agree to sell you the property at a predetermined price, call it $100,000. You use a purchase and sale agreement to put that property under contract with the seller, and then you market that contract to find an end buyer for more than $100,000. And if you're able to find an end buyer for, let's say, $110,000, you then assign that contract to your end buyer for $110,000. Your end buyer buys the property from the seller for $110,000, but the seller only gets $100,000 as that's what was agreed to. And then you actually get a $10,000 assignment fee in the middle. So people love the idea of wholesaling because you don't need money to do this business. You just assign your contract and then make a margin in the middle. And that's the beautiful thing about this strategy. But there are some times when you will need the money to actually buy this property and then sell the property to your end buyer. And the reason that people would use this strategy is because there's really two main problems with wholesaling houses. The first issue is that some title companies will not do split HUDs when you're closing a deal. So what does a split HUD mean? A split HUD means that there's a buying HUD and a seller's HUD. So the buyers, you guys, would be on your own separate HUD and you'd have all your own numbers there. And then the seller would be on their own document and they would have all their own numbers right there. So they're split documents, so nobody sees each other's numbers. So if they won't split the HUD and then there's one HUD for both the buying and the selling transaction, then on that HUD, there's gonna be a $10,000 assignment fee payable to you. So the seller could see that and be pissed off to see that you're making $10,000 on a house, or your buyer could see that and be pissed off because they see that you're making $10,000 on the house without doing any work. So either way you look at it, it has a potential for things to blow up and for the entire deal to fall apart and lose an entire $10,000 assignment fee by having somebody see it and start asking questions. And then the second thing is, and we kind of alluded to it earlier, but even with split HUDs, even if you do have them entirely split, the seller will never see your assignment fee. So they'll never ask you like, hey, wait a minute, why are you making, getting paid $10,000 for this? They'll never see it, so it doesn't matter. But the buyer, your assignment fee is on the buyer side HUD because the buyer is paying you your assignment fee because he's paying the seller $100 and then you $10,000. So the buyer will see it, and the problem that can happen here is the buyer can get butthurt, and he can see on the HUD, like, you're making $10,000? Why are you making $10,000? You didn't even do any work. Like, I'm not paying $10,000. I'm not paying you your assignment fee. And then with all reality, it shouldn't even matter because if they thought the deal was a deal at $110,000, it doesn't matter who's making money in the middle. If you got the property for $1 and they were paying you a $110,000 assignment fee on top of that, it shouldn't matter because the deal still makes sense. But unfortunately, in today's day and age, people like to count other people's pockets. So an end buyer can see that and start counting your pockets and asking themselves why you're making so much money without doing any work. Now, this can be a $1,000 assignment fee, a $10,000 assignment fee, $50,000, $100,000 assignment fee. No matter what it is, buyers always tend to find a way to complain and count other people's pockets. So how can this play out, right? I've seen it happen before. I personally witnessed this. A buyer shows up to buy the house. And remember, you already told the seller that closing was happening on Friday. You're like, yep, we're good. Closing's happening on Friday. You called your buyer. You're like, hey, buyer, like, we're good for Friday, right? Because you're middlemaning the buyer and the seller at this point. And everybody's like, yep, we're good for Friday. And then you get to the closing table. The seller signs. They leave. They're all happy and joyous. And then the buyer arrives. And then he looks you in your eye and says, yeah, I'm not paying you $10,000. And you're like, yeah, you are. Like, you already have the paperwork. Sign the paperwork. He's like, I'm not paying it. I'll pay you $1,000. And you're like, no, forget you. Like, I'm not cutting my fee by $9,000. He's like, all right, I'm not closing. And now the problem is the seller thinks that you are the one that's buying the deal, not your end buyer. So if you go back to your seller and then say like, oh, like I can't close on the deal, the seller's gonna be like, what do you mean? Why can't you close on the deal? Like, we were scheduled to close today. You can't really say because my end buyer won't buy the house, because then they'll know you're making money in the middle. So you kind of get caught in a catch-22 because they have leverage at that point. Your end buyer can be like, no, I'm not paying you. And like, what do you really have to do at that point? Unless you have a great rapport with the seller and can extend it and find another buyer to pay you money, then maybe you can do that. But a lot of times what happens is they have the leverage and they're like, I'm not paying you $10,000, I'll pay you $1,000. You're like, I'm not doing it for $1,000. And then you meet, let's say at $5,000 and you do the deal and you get a $5,000 assignment fee, but you just missed out on $5,000 because you had a wholesale fee. You wholesaled this house instead of double close this house. So how do you keep everybody 100% entirely out of your business? Instead of assigning it, you double close it, which means that you physically buy the property and then immediately sell it to that end buyer. Because on the HUDs, when you buy it, you're buying it. And when you're selling it, you're selling it. There is no assignment fee. Nobody knows how much money you're making. If you buy it for $1 and then sell it for $100,000, your end buyer has no idea how much of that $100,000 is actually profit to you. Now remember this, you're buying it and immediately selling it. So you get a purchase and sale agreement from your seller, and then you do a purchase and sale agreement to your end buyer contingent upon you buying the property in the first place because you don't own the property yet. And then you buy it and immediately, like I'm talking like in the same second, you sign the purchase docs and then you sign the sale docs, you buy it and sell it, and nobody can count your pockets. So why would you do something like this? One, nobody counts your pockets. But two, if you start wholesaling to hedge funds, which are buying a lot of rental properties nowadays in almost every market, they require that you double close these properties because they, on their books, they can't show paying people hundreds of thousands of dollars in assignment fees because they have like a board of directors and they can get in trouble for that. So they require that you double close these properties. So then they're just buying the house at a price rather than buying it at 100, but then paying somebody 110, right? It can get kind of complicated. So those are the two reasons why you might use this strategy. And of course, there's some benefits and some downfalls to this. The benefit is, number one, there's never going to be a hiccup. Nobody's ever going to count your pockets because nobody knows how much money you're making. So the deal will get closed most of the time compared to trying to wholesale the properties. Now the downfalls, it does cost you some money to do a double close compared to a wholesale. So when you're wholesaling a property, when you get it under contract for 100 and you assign it for 110, you make a full $10,000 to do this. Now with a double close, when you buy it, you're gonna have title fees and transfer fees and conveyance taxes that you're gonna have to pay. And the amount of these fees is dependent on the title company that you use and the purchase price of the house. But for like $100,000, $200,000 house, it's usually, you know, a couple grand, give or take, of fees that you're gonna have to pay to actually double close this property. And yes, I know, like you don't wanna make 8,000 instead of 10,000, but you're definitely gonna make the 8,000, and there's a chance that the 10,000 blows up entirely and you miss out on the entire $10,000. And the second downfall is that you actually need the money to buy the house in the first place, because you're actually buying the property and then immediately selling it. You're not assigning it. You have to buy it and then sell it. Now in the old days, what used to tend to happen is that title companies would allow your end buyer's funds to come in, and then you could use those funds to buy the first deal, and then you would sell it to that same buyer using those same funds. Since then, things have changed. You need two entirely separate sets of funds. So your end buyer needs their own funds, and you need your own funds to be able to buy it and then sell it to your end buyer. So that's where the title of this video came from, Transactional Funding. So there's actually lenders out there that fund deals just like this because there's little to no risk when people fund these deals. So if you're buying it and immediately selling it in the same second, there's very little risk. Usually these transactional lenders will charge 1 to 2, maybe 3% of a fee for doing this. So for the same example, $100,000 purchase and then $110,000 assignment price, you would need to borrow $100,000 to buy this deal, and you'd pay, call it 2%. So you'd pay $2,000 in fees to be able to borrow that money. And it's becoming more and more standard for people to actually start doing double closes as compared to simple assignment agreements. Some title companies are even going to the extent on a wholesale deal To physically have the seller sign a single piece of paper that physically states that so-and-so buyer is not actually buying the property. They're actually assigning their interests to so-and-so buyer and making a $10,000 assignment fee doing so. Please sign below. So just think about this at a closing. If a seller shows up to a closing and sees that document and starts asking questions, there's a chance that the entire deal blows up. So in my opinion, don't risk it. If you're making less than $5,000, then you might just want to go ahead and assign the property. Because if you're making less than $5,000, not too many people are going to be too upset with you making a couple $1,000s. If you make anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, some people might be upset. So that's a question that you're going to have to ask yourself. If you're making more than $10,000 or $20,000 on an assignment fee, me personally, I would double close that deal because I don't want to risk in any way, shape, or form a $20,000 assignment fee getting blown up at the closing table because the seller gets pissed off or my end buyer gets pissed off about how much money I'm making and start counting my pockets. The solution to this, again, is buying it and immediately selling it, doing a double closing and using a transactional lender if needed to be able to fund that deal on your behalf to get rid of any of those possibilities. And you may be sitting there saying, well, if I have to buy this property, isn't there more risk involved with that? And the answer is kind of, but not really, because usually how it's set up for a transactional lender to fund the deal is they usually require that the title company has both parties sign the documents. So the buyer and the seller both sign their purchase and sale agreements, and your end buyer's money is already wired into the closing company. So they have all the signatures and all the money. The only thing that they're waiting on is for your funds, the transactional lender's funds, to get to closing for you to buy the house, to then buy it and then sell it. That usually eliminates a decent amount of the risk because everything else is done just waiting on your funds. And again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not offering financial advice. If you do plan to use this strategy, seek your own legal counsel because there are a couple extra legality issues. But usually if you're double closing it, buying it and selling it on the same day, it usually eliminates a lot of those questions. So comment below. Let me know if you like this strategy or if this seems like a waste of money potentially. While you're down there, smash that like button for the YouTube algorithm. Hit that subscribe and notification bell so you can get all this content going forward. As always, appreciate you being here. We'll see you on the next one.